Just want to welcome people to the Vermont Tempest Collective's meeting on the mic. That's right, I'm supposed to sit closer to the mic. Let me pick that up. Wanted to welcome people and thank you so much for being here tonight. As you know, these are profoundly frightening, terrifying, and raging times. And on the one hand, the scale of the attacks that we're seeing in so many places around the country are giving people, I think, the fright of their lives. It feels like every day is a siege, no matter where you look throughout the country. And at the same time, the response that we're seeing in neighborhoods, in churches, in workplaces, in schools, in colleges continues to amaze. It feels like, the biggest fight back of our side that we've seen in our lifetimes. So we wanted to put this panel together to hear from various organizers from around the country and locally so that we can really share experiences, knowledge, the kind of both granular and larger political lessons that we're all starting to learn to strengthen our ability to fight back on our side. Because on the one hand, you get a sense of how terribly organized and well-funded and armed and so on Trump and his minions are. On the other hand, you also get a sense of how organized and determined and on the move our side is. So they have their guns, they have their riches, but we have our solidarity. And I think that we have the potential through our collective action to be much stronger than they could ever imagine. So I want to introduce folks before we get started with the panel. And really, we're so lucky to have such a tremendous collection of people who are going to be speaking tonight. I'm going to read from the page because I'll forget if I don't. So Ashley Smith is a member of Vermont May Day Strong, the Vermont Coalition for Palestinian Liberation, and the Tempest Collective. Janette Corcelius, who's going to be joining us online, is a community organizer in Minneapolis, a member of the union OPEIU Local 13, Twin Cities Democratic Socialists of America, the Remember 1934 Collective, and the Tempest Collective. Todd Chretien, also joining us online, is former state co-chair of the Maine Democratic Socialists of America. He's a farmer, an educator, a candidate for the Maine House from Portland and Falmouth, and an organizer with No ICE for Maine. Rachel is an organizer with Migrant Justice here in Vermont, and as people know, Migrant Justice has really been leading the fight against ICE and against deportations well before Trump ever even threw his hat in the ring, going back to the deporter-in-chief Obama and before then. So Rachel's going to be speaking about what they've been doing locally. And finally, Rachel Altman is a clinician at the Jean Garvey School and a member of AFSCME 1674. She's one of a group of Howard Center workers who were disciplined for walking out of work to join the protests here in Vermont on January 30th. And finally, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Tristan Adey. I'm a member of the Tempest Collective, and I'm also a member of the UVM Staff United Union, and we're also organizing rapid response networks on the Hill. So I'm definitely glad to hear from everybody here. So I'll turn it over to Ashley first.
Great, thanks, Tristan. So people endured the Super Bowl, perhaps one of the most boring Super Bowls in the history of the United States. But two teams played, but Bad Bunny won, which is what we have to say. 135 million people watched Bad Bunny, the largest halftime appearance in the history of the Super Bowl. So Trump and his stupid TPS USA alternative only got 5 million drongos and knuckle draggers to watch that incredibly racist, boring concert in the middle of the Super Bowl. So that's light relief. The reality is that Trump is engaged in an attempted authoritarian nationalist transformation of the U.S. government. At home, he has launched nothing less than a class war against all of us, busting federal government unions, laying off 1 million plus workers, shredding the social safety net, and depriving federal workers of union rights all across the country. And the cutting edge of that class attack is the attack on migrant workers. They are trying to attack migrant workers to divide and conquer the entire working class of the United States. And that authoritarian nationalist agenda is not only domestic, it's global and international, and specifically in the Western Hemisphere, where Trump is trying to impose a new Monroe Doctrine with the coup in Venezuela, the siege of Cuba, the threat to annex Greenland, the threat to even annex Canada. So if you look at what Trump has said about that agenda, one of his key goals is to stop what he calls the era of mass migration. That is, the anti-immigrant agenda is both domestic and global under the Trump regime. And to carry that war on immigrants out, he has transformed ICE and Customs and Border Patrol into nothing less than his own personal paramilitary to go after immigrants across the country. The Department of Homeland Security, which is a new entity founded back in 2003, is now the government's largest police force in the country, and they have a massive budget. If you look at the budget of ICE right now, it's $37 billion a year. CBP has a budget of $65 billion a year. Together, that is the seventh largest military budget in the world. And that is just to carry out this assault on immigrants in our country. And under Trump, we've seen the attack on immigrants go from the border, which was going on under both parties, but in particular inside the United States, which was going on before, but now it's been dramatically escalated. And to carry that out, Trump has added 12,000 new officers to ICE, and he has now brought CBP to a total of 45,000 officers. So you're talking about a giant military force that's deployed at the border, inside the country against immigrants. The Trump administration has boasted that it has deported 675,000 immigrants over the last year. Here in Vermont, over 100 immigrants from within the state have been detained, and 900 immigrants have been held in Vermont jails over the last year. And we know some of the signal cases of people who've been arrested, detained, and attempted to be deported. Ignacio Nacho de la Cruz, Haiti Perez, and most recently, Hussein Nur Hussein, who we freed. We freed all those three people, but tragically, Stephen Tendo, a union brother from the UVM Medical Staff United Union, is now in a jail in Dover, New Hampshire. So this is the brutality of U.S. apartheid. This is the brutality of the second-class non-citizenship that immigrants are reduced to in the United States as a cheap labor force for big capital. That's American apartheid. Now, the Democratic Party has aided and abetted this entire war on immigrants. It didn't begin with Trump, and it's important to say that because all the money, all the hiring of these officers began as a bipartisan project long ago, and especially over the last two decades. And remember, Obama was the deporter-in-chief and still has the record for most deportations of any presidential administration. The most recent figure that I read was that Obama deported 5.3 million people over his 8 years in office, which is still the record for any president. And under Biden in his 4-year term deported 4.6 million immigrants. So it began as a bipartisan project, and the most recent Democratic Party presidents have carried out this war. Patrick Leahy brought the ICE data facility to Vermont, and that's now being expanded not only as a snitch line to turn in immigrants all across the country and around the world, but now to include surveillance of social media with a second facility out in Williston. This monstrosity was brought to Vermont by Patrick Leahy and the Democratic Party. And so far, the Democrats have done very little to stop what Trump is doing all across the country. And if you look at how they're positioning themselves right now, they oppose the abolition of ICE, and they want to find a way to sustain its funding. So if you look at what they're demanding, they're saying we want body cameras, we want no masks, and we want more training. If people remember, this is exactly the trickery the Democratic Party used in the wake of George Floyd's murder. They said, we'll pay for body cameras, we'll pay for all sorts of training, and therefore they increased funding of the police force. They're trying the same thing all over again with ICE and Customs and Border for Border Patrol. So if we want to stop ICE and we want to stop CPB and what they're doing all across the country, what they're doing in Vermont, what they're doing in the big cities that they've been surged to, like Minneapolis and states like Maine. We're going to have to rely on our own working class resistance to this assault on our sisters, brothers, and siblings in the working class, our migrant brothers, sisters, and siblings. And that's exactly what we've seen. Wherever ICE has surged, we've seen the mass response of working class people from LA to Chicago to Minneapolis and into Maine. And Maine is really the high water mark of what we've seen so far, where after a month of being subjected to thousands of ICE officers and CBP, the people of Minneapolis, especially after the murder of Renee Good and then Alex Preddy, rose up in a mass strike against the Trump regime and put the Trump regime on its back foot. So they pulled out Bovino, they essentially fired him, and they're now in a process of trying to decrease the number of officers deployed to Minneapolis. But Trump is not going to stop. If you see what he's already talking about doing, he wants more surges in more places all across the country. And there's a reason why he can't stop. If he stops, then his whole regime is discredited because he ran on the question of the crackdown on migrants in this country. So as he loses popular approval, so his approval rating is now at 37%, as he loses popular approval, he's going to become more dangerous, more authoritarian, and move to interfere with our elections themselves to carry out his extreme right-wing agenda and attack on migrants in this country. So he's threatening to nationalize the elections. Bannon has said, well, they'll deploy ICE to the polls. So what are we going to have to do ourselves to stop Trump? There are three key things that I think we need to do. First and foremost, we have to build the infrastructure of the resistance. That means building organizations like Migrant Justice, funding organizations like Migrant Justice, organizing emergency response networks in all our workplaces, all our towns and cities, and building coalitions like the May Day Strong Coalition, which is going to call for strike action this coming May Day here in Vermont and across the country. Second thing is we need campaigns to make our state an ICE-free zone. That means in every single workplace saying ICE is not allowed. They have to be Fourth Amendment zones where ICE is not allowed on their premises. We have to push cities and towns to vow non-collaboration, even if it violates the federal law, with ICE and CPB, so that they can try and put a stop to ICE's attacks. And we have to organize campaigns like the campaign to free Stephen Tendo and stop his deportation. And the third thing is we need mass protests that build towards mass strikes to shut this country down, make it ungovernable, so that we can stop Trump in his tracks. None of us are ready for that, but we have to organize, plan, and develop our infrastructure, our campaigns, and our capacity to do what we've not imagined doing before, which is what they proved is possible in Minneapolis. That's our example. We have to rise to the occasion here in Vermont, every state across the country, because if we don't do it, nobody's going to do it. We have to save ourselves from the attack of the Trump administration.
Okay, Janette, we're going to hear from you next.
Hello, comrades. My name is Janette Corcelius. I've been living in the Twin Cities since 2023. I currently live in St. Paul and work in Minneapolis as a community organizer. I'm a member of my union, the Office Professionals Employees International Union Local 12. I am the daughter of an immigrant from Morocco. For 11 weeks, Minnesota has been under siege and under occupation by our federal government, primarily by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. ICE has been around since 2003, implemented by George W. Bush's administration. I strongly believe that we need to abolish ICE and we need to imagine a world without borders. Just today, Homan met with the mayor of Minneapolis, and immigrants and other people of color were not notified that there was going to be a meeting at City Hall, and that administration put them at risk. Many of them felt that they had to leave the building. So on Ashley's point of seeing the Democrats collaborate with the fascists, this is another example. While we are experiencing a drawdown, they've taken 700 agents out of the Twin Cities or Minnesota at large. There's still 2,000 agents left when there would normally be 150, and terrible things are still happening here. ICE has done raids at businesses, homes, and streets by schools, taking people out of cars, even crashing into them, ripping people off their bikes. When neighbors and allies stand up against ICE, they are met with tear gas that is banned in international warfare that causes cancer and miscarriage. Long-range acoustical devices known as LRAD have been utilized at noise demonstrations where ICE agents are sleeping at hotels. LRAD causes hearing damage and psychological damage. ICE has been drawing their weapons in many instances. They've murdered 2 of the 4 people they've shot in Minnesota, Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy, who were legal observers. On the day Renee Nicole Good was murdered, ICE tear gassed students and detained an educator at Roosevelt High School in South Minneapolis. Minneapolis public schools had to close for 2 days after that incident, and then subsequently had to provide a hybrid option where students had the option to learn virtually. This would not have been available without the organizing efforts of Minneapolis Families for Public Schools and the Minneapolis Federation of Educators Local 59. Our most impacted members of our community have been sheltering in place for 11 weeks. They are unable to work, let alone leave their homes. Our city councils in the Twin Cities called on the governor to implement an eviction moratorium that still has not been done. It's been very frustrating to see Governor Walz do nothing when he claims he has no further political ambitions. These masked agents are coming after immigrants, whether they're citizens or not. They come after Black folks who are descendants of slavery, Native American, Indigenous people, and white allies. They've been detaining people at the Whipple building, named after Bishop Henry Whipple, who urged the federal government not to execute the 303 Dakota people. Wow. He was able to save many, but still 38 plus 2 Dakota peoples were hanged in an execution ordered by President Abraham Lincoln in Mankato, Minnesota, as retribution from the U.S. Dakota War of 1862. The Whipple building is also near Fort Snelling, which is a concentration camp for First Nations people. It is also where Dred Scott and his wife Harriet were held, even though slavery was illegal in Minnesota. Many of you have probably heard of the Dred Scott decision. Fort Snelling is also at the confluence where the Mississippi River and the Minnesota rivers meet. This is a sacred site for Dakota peoples known as Badote. ICE agents are reminiscent of Custer's army, slave patrols, the KKK, Gestapo, and the Israeli occupying forces. Minneapolitans believe Trump is retaliating against the city for George Floyd uprising that resulted in a racial reckoning across the country. While the uprising happened in 2020, I was living in Virginia at the time, and I saw that the fruits of the uprising being that we got rid of Confederate flags throughout the South, tore down Confederate statues, and we also renamed many of the racist highways and streets along in the South. There's also a belief that Minnesota is facing backlash for being a blue state for over 50 years of presidential elections. Minnesota has stayed blue when the rest of the country has gone red. We have been resisting with our phones and our whistles. We use our phones to document their abuses and use the Signal app to coordinate with our neighbors. Whistles are blown to let at-risk neighbors know that ICE is here. We are using our labor unions to ensure employers in their workplace adhere to the Fourth Amendment. Lutheran pastors are risking arrests and standing firm to protect their congregants. Elected officials are on the streets with constituents. They've passed ordinances to separate police collaboration from ICE. Unfortunately, that has not been successful due to the inherent racist nature of the police. We had a one-day general strike on January 23rd where 1 out of 4 Minnesotans participated and where 100,000 people marched in downtown Minneapolis in negative 20-degree weather.
That's incredible.
Sadly, the momentum to extend the general strike was broken after that Friday, but radicals in the labor movement are trying to bring forth another mass strike to the fore. We will have a workers' assembly in the Twin Cities this Saturday, February 15th, to organize and push for an open-ended mass strike against ICE. And my hope too was that this would spread all around the country and we would abolish ICE as a nation. Last week, we experienced a powerful organizing victory where the St. Paul City Council voted not to renew a contract with Forward Edge ASIC, a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin, the most powerful weapons manufacturer in the world. They were creating microchips that have been used in F-35 jets that exacerbated the genocide of Palestinian peoples. Lockheed Martin is also supplying ICE here in the United States. This is proof that the imperial boomerang has come back around to us. And it's important to also note that in light of what's come out with the Epstein files, we're seeing how unfettered mass wealth, Zionism, white supremacy, capitalism, fascism has been coming all together to do mass harm to women and children. And it's on us as workers to rise up and strike for that issue as well. The Zionists, the neo-Nazis, and neo-Confederates are united under their banner of white supremacy. I mentioned earlier that how I saw the George Floyd uprising impacted me when I lived in Virginia. There's a history that Minnesota has taken the Confederate battle flag from Virginia and refuses to give it back. And that is something that Virginia keeps trying to take back. We also have had a number of neo-Nazis come to the Twin Cities like Jake Lang to try to push their hate on us, but we've had people in this last weekend throw dildos as part of their resistance at ICE agents and Jake Lang. Minnesota has a progressive history of resistance, from the 1934 Minneapolis Teamsters truckers strike, which made Minneapolis a union town, to the American Indian movement being birthed out of the Little Earth Native American neighborhood in South Minneapolis, which many of you have heard of. Leonard Peltier, thankfully he was released at the end of President Biden's term, to the George Floyd uprising, which ignited a racial reckoning around the country. We're making history, but we on the left must have a united front to fight fascism, globalization, capitalism, and repression. By building international solidarity with working class peoples, we will be victorious. From Turtle Island to Palestine, we say no to occupation and genocide. Thank you, comrades.
Thanks, Janette. We're going to hear from Todd next.
Great, thank you, everyone. How much time would you like me to take?
8 minutes is the ask.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to thank everybody for being here tonight, and it's really encouraging to hear from Janette in Minneapolis, and we've really been learning a lot from what people in Minneapolis have been doing, and not just in a kind of reading it in the newspapers or seeing it online, but direct communication, organizer to organizer. So that's been really critical for us at the union level, at the street activist level, and at the immigrants' rights organization level. So what the knowledge and the strategies that are being developed in Minneapolis and before them in Los Angeles and Charlotte and Chicago and Seattle, are really spreading and are really taking hold. So it's very encouraging to hear your report, Janette. As it happens, a little bit later tonight, I'm speaking on a panel about the WTO protests in Seattle in 1999. And it's trying to find a thread through all these is a very interesting thought process. And of course, very happy to be with folks from Vermont. Migrant justice is near and dear to my heart. I was saying earlier, I usually wear a migrant justice sweatshirt. It's just getting too ratty, so I really do need a new one. And Migrant Justice, in my mind, is really an exemplary organization that combines mutual aid, defense, legal support, labor organizing, but also has an eye towards political organizing beyond its base. So thank you for Migrant Justice and also to Tempest comrades for putting this together tonight. I just want to speak a little bit about what's been happening in Maine and draw a couple lessons, and then be interested to hear the rest of the folks. So I won't go through the details. I think you probably know it. I would essentially say that what happened to Maine is a mini Minneapolis, something on the order of maybe 20% as intense. I sent 250 agents here, not 300, not 3,000, but they concentrated them in an area that has about 250,000 people, that is in southern Maine, and really an area of about 150,000 people. So it was a very intense attack. We from the day that Renee Good was murdered, had a sense this was coming. We began to get leaks, and it's funny, you get leaks in the state apparatus and you start to hear things, and then the immigrant networks are very good about picking up, because so many people are in detention, they hear things, they get the word out. So we knew that they were coming and we prepared. And as I said, we took a lot of the lessons from Minneapolis and other places. So I'll just try to draw just a little bit of a picture in a minute or so, because if you just think of it as a mini Minneapolis, I think it gives you a good idea. 250 ICE agents came to the state. They concentrated in Portland and the environs. We actually thought they were first going to go to Lewiston, a city about a half an hour north where the Somali population is concentrated, because that was their political cover. They were going after so-called Somali fraud. But they went after Portland, which is really the main bulk, or it got a plurality of the immigrant population living in the state. So that attack consisted of same thing we've seen in other places: unmarked vehicles, masked agents, pepper spray everywhere, dragging people out of their cars, racial profiling, circling around schools and workplaces. They abducted in the first week 206 people. And their stated goal, which they put on their website, was we are going to take 1,400 people, which would have been, we figured it out, it's something like, if they had taken 1,400 immigrants out of Maine, it would have been something like 25% of immigrant families would have suffered a loss. Wow. So it's an enormous threat against the state. So what did we do? We did what Ashley said. We relied on ourselves, relied on mass action. I'll speak a little bit about the tactics of that. But it was a really encouraging response. I'm not kidding when I say something like probably 5,000 or 10,000 people in an area of maybe 150 or 200,000 people took some sort of direct action. Wow. And across the state, people were preparing for the next wave coming after them. So this was really a statewide response. The organization I work with called No ICE for Maine, we've had a year-long campaign trying to cut the contract between the Cumberland County, the surrounding county. Its jail is the main ICE detention facility. So Ashley referenced the 75,000 or so CBP and ICE agents in the country, which sounds like an enormous number, but that's about the number of cops that are in New York City. So in terms of the actual military forces and their infrastructures, where they detain most people is in county jails across the country. They use this infrastructure of existing prisons as a kind of gulag archipelago where they detain people. Mm-hmm. So we've been trying to contract. And that specific tactic gave us a way to rally people around and build some unity. But that was a relatively small campaign involving a few hundred people. We leveraged that when we heard they were coming into a statewide conference call of 1,600 people with representatives, or at least people from 157 towns in Maine, and we set out a series of tactics. And our tactics really came directly from Minneapolis. First, tactic number one, we go where they go. So we do the rapid response, we do the verifier network, we do the Fourth Amendment trainings, we do not let them have any peace, we find their hotels, we do drum brigades outside. I won't even say how we did it, but people will know, and we're happy to teach on the signal networks, et cetera. You can find them, you can track them, and you can bother them, and you can slow them down. So that's the first thing. We go where they go. We do not give them a moment's peace. Everything they do, we force them to do out in the open, and we slow them down, and we tie them down. The second thing is mutual aid, and mutual aid is absolutely critical. I think Janette referenced people sheltering in place for 11 weeks. Our folks had to shelter in place for 2 or 3 weeks, and it's important to understand the dynamics of this often looks like white people or citizens acting, immigrants sheltering in place. I think it's very important for us to conceive of the actions that immigrant families are taking to defend themselves, to defend their families, to defend their kids by not going to work, by not going to school, by not allowing themselves to be preyed upon. That is a tremendously risky and difficult action to take. You're talking about people giving up rent, giving up wages, giving up food, giving up access to education. So the actions that thousands and thousands of immigrant families took to keep themselves safe is critical for us to appreciate. The third thing is mass actions. We just had a bunch of big protests and marches. Last thing I'll say is we had a kind of culminating event on Saturday night. It ended up being about 400 people, and it was a skill share to do everything I've been talking about. Our original intention before they retreated was that we were going to have 3,000 people at an indoor mass rally, and that was going to be the platform upon which we were going to announce escalating mass actions around the state in line with what Minneapolis was trying to do. Because they retreated 48 hours early, some of the intensity was replaced with the need now to build stable and ongoing organization. So that's really that's really how it looks from Maine, and I'm just happy to be here, happy to answer any questions. Last thing, I'll just throw in a political point about I'm all for abolishing ICE. I think we have to abolish ICE. I think that's an absolutely incredibly important point to raise. But when you are fighting them in the streets and when they are taking your neighbors, the key is forcing them to retreat. And so don't mix up what is going to be a very, very difficult fight to win over the course of the coming years to abolish ICE with the immediate tactics of you divide and conquer the political establishment, you bring people over to your side who maybe waffle, temporary allies, and you use the power of the movement to try to build that united front that Janette spoke about to force them to retreat. And in retreating, you build the power for the future fight to abolish ICE. So I think that is our immediate goal, to force them to retreat, to give up their prisoners, to return the family members home, and then and that sets us up to win that fight around abolition.
All right, thanks, Todd. We're going to hear from Rachel next. I think you can either put that here or hold it.
Yeah, I can hold it. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, either in person or online. The fun thing about going, fourth, is people have pretty well laid the groundwork, so I get to just talk very specifically about Vermont and the work we're doing here. So I'm assuming that if you're in the room, you probably know this already, but just in case, Migrant Justice is a grassroots human rights organization here in Vermont that was founded and led by, immigrant workers, specifically from Latin America, mostly Mexico, increasingly from other countries as well, like Ecuador, Venezuela. And as has been said, this is not work that's just starting out. We are generations and centuries into the struggle against capitalism, against white supremacy, imperialism that we're seeing really bubble up right now. But it has been here the whole time. Migrant Justice was founded following the preventable workplace death of a young dairy worker named Jose Owith. He was working alone late at night with very minimal training and was dragged into farm machinery and strangled to death with his own clothing. And that became the spark that led to the creation of Migrant Justice. So since then, we've been doing a lot of organizing around human rights broadly, which means we got our noses in quite a lot from, labor organizing, deportation defense, basically everything that goes along with building the power of our community, right? Specifically over the last year, obviously we have seen quite a few changes here in Vermont and nationally. As you mentioned, Ashley, more than a 10 times increase in immigration detentions. And people have been talking a lot about ICE tonight, which is good. ICE is a big part of that. So is Border Patrol, right? In Vermont, more than half of the people, members of our community that were taken by Border Patrol. And I think it's pretty important to understand and differentiate between the two agencies, right? Because they work in different ways. And the way that we push back against them are very related, but need to be a little bit different because their tactics are different, right? You know, again, as has already been mentioned, Vermont has become a regional hub for immigration detention because of contracts between DHS and the Vermont Department of Corrections. And we're in a situation where, in a very pragmatic way, that's kind of good, which is hard, right? It never feels good to be like, thank God people are being detained here, because it's objectively bad, and we should never be in a world where that's the case. And because it means that people are kept closer to home, it means we're more able to support. So we're being put in a situation where, you know, we have to think very, very pragmatically. And at the same time, that doesn't mean we stop pushing towards the abolition of ICE, the abolition of the prison system broadly. So the point there is less, thank goodness that Vermont is paying the government is paying Vermont, but instead that, you know, we find little ways to resist and big ways, right? You know, some of the other ways that we've been resisting have been very public, right? So very loudly, we've been marching in the streets. We've been doing, letter writing campaigns, sending petitions around. And those are all part of what we call Not One More campaigns, as in Not One More deportation. And that's the way that we mobilize after somebody has already been detained to win their freedom. And this is something that's been enormously successful, right? You know, there's a lower proportion of people getting out of immigration detention now than there were pre-Trump, right? Things have changed. For a while, if somebody hadn't come in with a visa, they were ineligible for immigration bond. That's, you know, a little bit up in the air still. But we've been able to successfully get quite a few of our community members out of detention. You know, several of the dairy workers who were detained on a farm in Berkshire in April of last year, Haiti and Nacho, Emmanuel and Guadalupe, like time and time again, we see that through mobilization that we've been able to do because of the 15 years of organizing and political education that we've been doing. You know, we've been building these networks for over a decade, right? We continue, despite federal pressure and despite policy changes, to be able to succeed in that way. So that's the very public work or part of the very public work that we've been doing. Also a little bit behind the scenes, but increasingly publicly, just because of the way that things are changing. We've been organizing rapid response networks as well. We now have, you know, a couple thousand people who have been trained. We did basically a training a week all of last year to build the capacity throughout the state to respond in moments of crisis. You know, a couple thousand is great. We need a couple thousand more. We need a lot more than a couple thousand more, and that's something that, you know, we're continuing to push and grow. Tomorrow we have a rapid response training where already more than 600 people have signed up, which no pressure at all. But it's exciting, right? And I think we're in a time right now where there's so much energy going towards rapid response, which in some ways is really good, right? Like, this is the push that we've wanted the whole time, right? Of people becoming politicized and radicalized and being excited and willing to take those steps. And also, we want to make sure that we're doing it in a coordinated way that is also following the lead of the most impacted communities, right? Because what we do see is, you know, people trying to reinvent the wheel or wanting to work in more of white savior mode of saying, I, as an ally, or I, as a white person, I, as, a U.S. citizen, know the right way to do this, and I'm going to do it my way. Instead of listening to the impacted communities who've been dealing with this, again, for decades, for centuries, right? And so that deep experiential knowledge and that generational knowledge is what needs to be guiding us, right? So, you know, those are two parts of it. We've also done a lot of Know Your Rights trainings within the immigrant community. as much or as little as the rights that we have are actually being respected, it's important to know what they are. I think we are lucky to be in a state and in a context where the immigrant community is exceptionally well organized, and exceptionally well, educated in what their rights are. We've been laying the groundwork for the resistance that we're in now since we were created, right? So for instance, more than 10 years ago now, we started and ended up winning a campaign to get statewide policies put in place that make it so that local law enforcement cannot collaborate with immigration enforcement in the majority of contexts, right? And so as, nationwide, we see a very large portion of the increase in immigration detentions coming from collaboration between cops and immigration enforcement. Mm-hmm. That's something that we've seen no evidence of in Vermont, since Trump went into office and before that as well. And that was, again, a campaign that we did more than 10 years ago, right? And so continuing to push that legacy of resistance and being willing to work on all fronts, in the streets, with rapid response, with preventative work, also with legislative work, which is less fun in many ways, but also can be really important.
Absolutely.
And I think it's really easy in the left to feel like, oh, the government, we don't want to have anything to do with that, which is very deeply fair. The government is the body that's putting us through all of this. Mm-hmm. And I think a diversity of tactics is really important, especially right now when we're in active crisis. So we have some legislative projects going on this year, specifically looking to, have more protected places. The same, anti-masking laws that are being put out around the country. And the one that I think personally is probably going to be the most impactful is getting universal representation for immigrant detainees in Vermont. Mm-hmm. Because unlike with criminal proceedings, in immigration proceedings, you do not have the right to an attorney. And that's part of why so many people are being so quickly pushed through the system and deported right now, and always, is because people don't have access to legal counsel, don't have access to that support. The last thing I'll say, and I know I'm at 8 minutes, is that anti-deportation work is incredibly important, right? I think it's very top of mind for most people right now, including many immigrants, because it answers that question of whether or not people get to go home, right? Which I think everyone feels in their gut is important, right? But that same question about what kind of home are people going back to is just as important, right? Because, I want my friends free, I want my neighbors free, but I don't want them going back to a home where, they're sleeping with mold, with cockroaches, without sufficient heat. I don't want them going back to work where they're, winning $12 an hour, 80 hours a week for doing incredibly challenging work, right? So as we're organizing against deportation and against ICE, we also need to be organizing to build worker power, and to, not only resist, but build that world, right? And so with things like the Milk with Dignity program, with other worker-driven projects, campaigns, that's how we can do that as well. And so I think taking advantage of this moment where people are paying so much attention to rapid response, to deportation defense, and having, using this as an opportunity for political education and an opportunity to pull people into the broader struggle towards our collective freedom and our collective liberation, is a primary goal of what we're doing right now. So with that, I will...
Rachel.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Rachel to Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel. Doubted myself for a minute.
Yeah.
Rachel's going to be our final speaker, and then we'll have time for questions and more comments.
Hey, everybody. I'm Rachel Altman. I work at the Jean Garvin School. It's a therapeutic alternative school under the Howard Center, which for those of you who don't live here, that's our designated mental health agency in Chittenden County, Vermont. I'm also a member of Howard Center's union, newly a member of the Howard Center Union. Thank you for that. So just a little bit about what just happened at Jean Garvin. Myself and all of our coworkers, we heard the call from Minneapolis to go on a nationwide general strike. And it wasn't really a question of whether or not we were going to join it. It was just like, who's joining us? In my mind, I was like, I'm going to do this whether or not anyone's joining me. I had never organized something like that before. I'd been a part of many protests, a lot of activism, but never been the one to organize before. And I've been saying this to members of our union, to other coworkers. I think as a social worker, in the work that I do, in the work that the Howard Center does, I think we were set up in a really unique and special way that the work we do is very relational. And so it was really, in a way, really easy to organize. I was able to go to one of my coworkers and just say, hey, have you heard about this strike? We're going to do this, right? And they were like, of course we are. And so I took it upon myself to organize all of the clinical team members. That person took it upon their self to organize all the academic team members, and then it just spidered out from there. And within one night, we had gained 12 people who committed to striking. By the next day, we had 24 people. We have 39 total at our school. Maybe a little naive on our part, we wanted to share with our leadership that we were intending to strike.
With your boss.
With our the school director, mostly because of the work that we do. Our students have experienced intense levels of trauma, and so sudden change is really hard for them. So we had planned to share a message of what a strike is, why we were choosing to strike, what this strike will accomplish. We wanted to share that message with their families, with our students, so they were prepared. We wanted to give them, I think we were giving them like over 24 hours notice, which was naive on our part, and we had all the best intentions. We gave it to our school leader. We didn't hear back from her for the rest of the day, so we decided we were going to walk out at the end of that school day to show that we were serious about this. Right before we walked out, everybody who had said they were going to strike received a letter from the CEO of the Howard Center saying that if we did strike, we would face discipline up to and including termination, which we were like, okay. Okay. So we all walked out. We work right next to Guy's Farm and Yards in Williston. So we were just huddling up in the freezing cold in the parking lot of Guy's Farm and Yard and talked about how they can't fire all of us. There's 20, at that point there was 24 of us. And we decided how we were going to go forward with this because it was really important to us. We talked about how ICE and the detaining and murder of our citizens and immigrants in this country are causing trauma, ongoing trauma, future trauma for everyone in this country, and especially our students, and that our job as clinicians, social workers, teachers is to mitigate that trauma. And so it's our job as those people in our students' lives to stand up for that. So we were like, there's no question in our minds that we're doing this. So we all gave notice that we weren't coming to work the next day. We, on Friday, didn't go to work. Students and families, unfortunately, were not given notice that that was happening, which is really unfortunate because we had really intended for them to have notice and get the information of what we were doing. We really wanted to include our students if they had wanted to join us. I think one of our biggest mistakes is forgetting that, you know, first and foremost, the Howard Center is a business. And, you know, which, saying that as a social worker is just like, I do this work as a social worker, and for them to think of it as a business is just, it's really disheartening. So Friday, staff gathered at the South Burlington Library. We rented out a space. We spent the whole day educating ourselves and each other about organizing, about how we can loop more people into what we were doing. We sent a press release out about a lot of what you all had just shared. We called for, we had to change our wording slightly, so we didn't like blast the Howard Center in the press, but we called for like a no trespass for ICE in our schools and Howard Center properties, but it read as Vermont properties and businesses. We were calling on other businesses, local businesses and organizations to join us. We went to the protests that happened in Burlington. And yeah, then the next day our supervisors received a mysterious discipline last week. All 4 of our direct supervisors who joined this strike with us, who very closely joined the strike with us, which they didn't have to do that. They all were out last week without any information to staff, students, or families. They were out last week, and then in the middle of last week, all of the staff that participated in the strike were told that we are receiving a 3-day suspension, and the Friday that we struck, we are not receiving pay for that day. So that happened. I also learned from Nolan, our union president, that this is the first wildcat strike in the history of the Howard Center, so that's sick as hell. So we've decided as a collective who participated in this that we're going to keep going forward. Our goal is to get other Howard Center workers to join us because we know there's going to be more calls for strikes. This fight is obviously not over. In our Friday we had a meeting with the entire school, all the staff, and one of the leaders of the Howard Center said, "Could you imagine if 1,500 Howard Center employees just got up and walked out of work?" And we were like, "That's the point."
What do you mean?
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Wow, so fantastic note to end on. So we have about half an hour for questions, further comments, further thoughts. And, definitely encourage people to speak no matter how half-baked the idea you think might be in your head. It's really important to get those out there. And again, the sort of point here is to learn from each other so that we come out of here stronger and that much more, I think, motivated to pick this up in the ways that people have talked about. There's so many opportunities for organizing, so many people to be talking to. I think what you said about, like, you went to your coworker and they were like, of course, like, that's the experience I've been having at work myself. Like, we put up a no ice sign. I work at a student health clinic at UVM, and our boss was like, that's too radical, you gotta take it down, even though he went to the protest that same day. And so I started a petition that said, like, this is the language that I want. The Supreme Court has said that ICE can't come into private areas. They can come into public, and technically a waiting room in a health clinic would be public. But the petition is like, we request that the waiting room be designated private, no ICE anywhere in the building. and that we put that up on the front of the clinic, not only for the benefit of our students, you know, many of whom are international, but a lot of our coworkers who themselves are immigrants. And so literally every single person, every coworker's been like, of course, I'm signing that. Like, why wouldn't I? And what do you mean we have to have a petition to get that sign put back up? So you know, there's so many opportunities to be talking to people and doing this stuff right now, and each of us is capable of doing, I think, so much more than we can even imagine in the coming weeks and months. So I'll take a list of folks who want to speak. It'd be great if folks do have questions, maybe we can get a few of those going at a time before the speakers at the front come back on it, so that it's a discussion of as many people as possible. So just raise your hand and I'll keep a list. Yep, go ahead.
I just go?
Yep.
Sorry, okay. So I guess this is to Todd, Janette, and Rachel, or anybody who wants to answer. But I've been seeing, like, I've been reading a lot and, like, hearing from friends kind of about, I mean, among my age group and among a lot of people, like, this fatigue of, like, you know, you wake up and something has happened in the night or something has been reported on. And, like, this, you know, trying to do the good thing and the right thing and help out our communities, and also, like, you know, having to continue on with our jobs, or, you know, paying our rent, like those sort of things. And I guess I was just curious as to any advice or ways that you guys have navigated that, being in these spaces and being also, I guess, for many years, and even in the current moment on the quote-unquote front lines, and sort of your personal experience with that.
So if it's okay, we'll take a couple more questions before we have folks speak to that.
We have someone on Zoom,
Great.
Janette. Oh, maybe looking to come back in.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say I could answer that question.
One thing while people are thinking, there's a question in the chat about wanting to know how to connect to rapid response trainings in Vermont. Is there a link or?
Yeah, I can certainly talk to that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, mine's a little bit more abstract and half-baked, to your point, Chretien. So it seems, and I've heard like echoes of this in I think every speaker, and if anyone on the panel wants to speak to it, or anyone in the audience, it seems like over the last years we've had these like bursts of energy, of mobilization, where people have gotten in the streets in ways that I had never seen before, and that in many ways I've been waiting my entire life to see. The downside of that has been, like, we get these bursts of energy and then they inevitably die down. And then we get these bursts of, you know, democratic taking of the streets, and then they inevitably, the energy goes out. I'm wondering, again, anyone on the panel or anyone in the room, like, how do we go from these kind of mobilizations, these bursts of energy, into sustained movement building?
So maybe take one more question or thought, and then some of the speakers could come back on those questions. Oh, we have two more. Ken, and then the fellow back here.
I was going to hold off, but my question is really close, I think, to Antonio, so maybe we just pull them together. But before I ask the question, I want to say thanks to all the panelists for showing up and all the work that you're doing. And Rachel, I just love that you organized this wildcat strike, because you hit the key thing that they can't fire us all. We just have to be in solidarity. And our labor is really the key to getting us out of this. It's, as Ashley was saying, politicians are not getting us out of this. We have two bad choices ahead of us, but our labor is action. And if 1,500 people from the Howard Center just walked out,
This is Mayday.
we can get whatever we want, right? We would all do that in solidarity. But my question is related to Antonio's, which is, you know, I think people in this room are really on board with this idea that we have an immediate problem that we need to stand up and address. But on the backside of that, like, we're not aiming to get back to, you know, 2024, that reality, that we want a different reality. And my question is, like, do we have ideas of how, you know, we take all this mass energy that's coming out, but I feel like, you know, in this room, we're behind this idea of we want something new, but I think for a lot of people that are coming out on the street today, they just want to go back to what they would have considered the norm. And I'm not interested in re-achieving the norm that we have, right? How do we fill this space with like the idea of a new reality and a new norm? And I don't know if that makes sense or not.
So we'll hear from you, and then we'll hear from some of the speakers again.
I was just wondering, like, for schools like ours, like, how much power do we actually have to no trespass signs and like keep that side of our schools? Because that was one of our demands for things.
Yeah, and when you say our demands, where was that coming from?
Like when we did the strike, we had like a list.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Gene Carbon worker.
Excellent.
Another striker.
We got a few strikers back there.
The posse of strikers.
Cool. Do you each want to take some turns addressing the questions?
Oh, sure. Does anybody else want to go first?
I can,
Rachel, why don't you go first?
Great.
Nothing would make me happier. I can respond very quickly to the most simple one of those questions, which is how to get involved with rapid response here in Vermont. As I kick everything over. So it's actually very straightforward. If you go to migrantjustice.net, you'll see a big button that says Get Involved. And all you have to do is give us your contact information and tell us what you're excited about. It asks for stuff like name, address, phone number, email. Share as much or as little information as feels good. We need a name, we don't need your legal name, etc. For a rapid response, we do need your phone number, right? Specifically because we organize our main rapid response group over text. Not in a big group text of a couple thousand people, because one, that would be incredibly untenable. And also, obviously that means that if someone responds and someone's in the group, they can see everyone else who's also in it. There's some, there are concerns around that. So we do it more like a text blast, so think about what politicians will do right around election season, where they just send this max text where they're like, my name is Rachel, and if you give me $5, I'm gonna save democracy, like that kind of vibe, where it's going to a bunch of other people, you don't know who else. The reason we're asking for where you live is because we do segment the rapid response list geographically. Mm-hmm. Because it does not make any sense for us to call on someone from Bennington if there's something going down in Newport, right?
Right.
So we segment it in that way. So name, phone number, at least the zip code. Those pieces of very basic information, you're good to go. This goes back to the point I was making earlier about rapid response being deeply important and not the whole struggle. On the list of things to potentially sign up for, rapid response is an option, right? It is one of the things you can look at. You'll also notice there are a bunch of other ways to get involved. Things like, actions, making art, doing data entry if you're not someone who wants to be out on the street. Regardless of what you're interested in, the skills that you have, whether you're introverted or extroverted, there is a way to tap in. And I think finding those, little niches that we can fit into is one of the ways that we can move towards more sustained movement building, right? Because ultimately what we want to do is, with mobilization, which is a key part, use that as a door, a gateway into being organized and politically educated, so that people can think and be like, maybe I don't want to go back to 2024, right? Maybe having a different or deeper analysis of what's going on, I can recognize that 2024 wasn't so good either, mm-hmm. right? And we can dream collectively and build that world. And so mobilization is really good, right? It is a key part of the cycle, but we also can't just leave it at mobilization, mm-hmm. right? And we've seen so many booms and busts of people's mm-hmm. energy, right? That is normal, that is expected. But if we can use that as a gateway and get people in. Exactly. So maybe we'll be here, then we get a big spike. So it's like, okay, Trump's elected the first time. Then we go down to here, which is a little higher than we were at the beginning. We go on, okay, 2024, now we're maybe here. That's a lot of people who've come and gone, but that's also a lot of people who've come and stayed. Yep. And that's
reservoir. Yeah.
A reservoir. That's good, right? And that is a victory. And organizing and building sustained movements is slow. And that's okay. It's the struggle of generations, right? And as intimidating as generational struggle sounds, I think that's also really hopeful, right? Of like, the struggle that we find ourselves in is something that has been going on, not like forever, but in the US, in what's now the US, for more than 500 years, right? That is so many generations of people who have been through everything we've been through and worse, right? Who have continued to, you know, pick away at it in the little ways they can and either make a huge step or a little step, or maybe they just get their neighbor or the weird kid next door. Like, the little pieces of it, I think, are how we sustain it, right? Yeah. And also finding joy in the movement, right? We can't build a movement that is just going outside and like hitting ourselves on the back and feeling like bad people, or waking up and doom scrolling and feeling so hopeless.
Yeah, you gotta have Bad Bunny.
You know, we can always shake ass, and that's what brings us together, right? Because that's what makes it sustainable, is the community aspect, it's the joy, and is that self-identity and identification with others who are also in the struggle. So that is a broad response to all of those questions, but that's what I'm thinking about right now.
Do other panelists feel like they want to weigh in, or do we want to go to more questions?
Yeah, I
Janette
can answer like the first. I don't remember the other questions. I hate when people do. Let's do all the questions. That's my personal thing, because I can't remember all of them. Because I'm traumatized and I'm going through a lot and I'm really busy. So I would have preferred if we took one at a time. But the first question, yeah, like I had a major crash out like a few weeks ago. Mostly because, you know, the day after we had this huge, big general strike that I know some people don't want to call it that, you know, I'm going to call it that. The next morning I wake up and Alex Preddy was murdered, and that was like the first thing I saw on my phone. And then the next moment I get on my work phone, and then the vice president of the union I'm working for was telling me that my friend, who's a Tempest comrade here in the Twin Cities, was tear gassed or pepper sprayed and wanted me to come help him. But I live in the other Twin Cities, so I had to and it was cold, so I had to get get out of bed, put all the clothing on possible, and drive over there and be there for him. So it's just like I was at this really big high to a really big low. But even the night before that, there was a comrade of mine who's an electrician, IBW, who was like, yeah, I was detained and charged with assaulting an officer and that's something that keeps happening, is for being a legal observer, they say you're assaulting an officer just for using your whistle and using your phone and saying, don't grab that person. So I had already gone from the high slightly lower and lower. So and then I'm also, obviously I'm in Tempest, where we all have the same political line, but then being in a big tent organization like DSA, quite honestly frustrates me. There's many times where why am I still in this organization? But there were people in the organization leading up to the general strike who were blocking and gatekeeping and gaslighting and not taking this moment seriously, and that was frustrating me. And like I mentioned in my little spiel, that after that, there were people who were not trying to extend the general strike, and that really frustrated me because we had this momentum. So I got extremely depressed and anxious and angry, and there was a day I cried for 2 days, and I have chronic illness, so then it gave way to the chronic illness, and I had to be out for like 6 days. And so sometimes if you're not careful of what's going on in your mind and your body, you will crash out and not be okay. And there was a book that was sitting on my shelf that I ordered in November called Read This When Things Fall Apart, that I should have read literally really should have read, because in November, we were 3 days away from going on strike for the union I work for, and we didn't go on strike, and I was frustrated. It was a long campaign. It had a lot going on. I was frustrated about that. So, you know, this was something I wanted to read about that, and it was sitting on my shelf, and I should have been reading for this moment, and I didn't, and I made that mistake. So I recommend all comrades get this book. It's by Callie Hayes. It's for letters to activists in crisis. And, you know, I go see a therapist weekly. I'm not on medication. I do use cannabis in a medical sense, but one thing I'm doing this week is I'm preparing for Ramadan to come up later this month. Is I'm seeing my Muslim chaplain, who I've seen during other dark and hard times, and telling her, I need the strength to move forward because this is really hard work. And, you know, and especially if you're an organizer, whether you're a professional organizer and you're an activist, and my role, the last 11 weeks, minus the weeks where I was gone on vacation because of Thanksgiving and winter break, members were crying in front of me and sobbing and falling in my arms, and I felt like I needed to be strong for them. And it took me a long time to process and grieve. And days after Alex Preddy was murdered, I watched a video that was talking about the mundaneness of life. And somehow, weirdly enough, that really hit me really hard. And I think the hard part too is that he was a union member. He was an AFGE, and the person who murdered him was a member of his union, technically, because Border Patrol, ICE, they're in AFGE. So that, me as a union organizer and a union member, that messed me up, knowing that his union brother murdered him, and that us as the labor movement weren't doing anything to continue this mass strike. So, long story short, try really hard to take care of yourself. Don't let the chores and the mundaneness of life get away from you, and try to exercise and try to cook for yourself or ask for help. I'm not very good. I haven't been exercising lately, but at one point I did yoga and meditation every day. And one thing they've been doing here in the Twin Cities, I haven't seen the last few days, but they were doing these nightly chaplain or like healing Zooms, and some people have been doing these somatic exercises. So this is hard work, and it's depressing. And also too, like I'm not gonna lie, like reading the little bit I've seen about the Epstein files has made my stomach churn. I don't have kids yet, someday hopefully. I can't even imagine how mothers are feeling in this moment, but my stomach is sick all the time. And so I would say, if you can be around people, be honest with people, and try not to have a crash out, and try not to get angry with people, even though it's inevitable, because the reality is, if you're a revolutionary socialist, Democrats, but also social Dems and radical liberals and whoever would have been the Mensheviks are gonna like piss you off in this moment. So be prepared for people to disappoint you, because it's inevitable. And I think that my problem is thinking people were going to be better in this moment, and they're not always going to be better. So I don't know if that was uplifting or depressing, but I'm just being honest.
Honest, thanks a lot. So we have about 10 minutes left for final questions, comments, etc., and then we'll take quick wrap-up statements from the panelists again. So Nolan, I've got you next.
Yeah, so I just want to point out the fact that the actions that took place in Minneapolis over the past few weeks are actions that, for the first time in the second Trump administration, put the administration on their heels.
Yep.
Right, like the Trump administration from day one has been, don't apologize for anything, never back down, go, 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 and just keep pushing forward. And it had been working for them until the general strike in Minneapolis. Yep. This is the first time that we have seen the administration step back, They got rid of Bovino.
Bovino, yeah.
Bovino, right? They brought in Holman, and they drew down 700 of their agents, right? Like, and we shouldn't be like, that's not a total victory, right? They are regrouping, but it caused them to regroup. It showed the power of what this type of direct action can take, and we should take an enormous amount of inspiration from that, because it does chart the way forward for how the administration can be beat. Because as other folks have been saying, it's not going to be from the Democrats, right? The Democrats want to return to the status quo with absolutely no acknowledgement of the fact that it was the former status quo, which is what got us into this mess, right? So there is no going back to the status quo. It is absolutely like moving forward, charting a new path, and the Democrats are going to be against us as we try to do that. But Minneapolis has shown the way. And then I just, the Garvin folks are going to be probably tired of me saying this because I've given them shout outs a couple of times, but I just want to, I've got to give them their flowers for what an amazing job they did. You know, Rachel took it as a given of like, yeah, we just all went to each other and it's like, we're doing this strike, right? Of course, right? And it's just an appreciation for how rare that is for an entire group of people like, yes, we're going on strike. And then when I was finally able to contact Rachel the day before the strike, it was after the threatening letter from the Howard Center administration had gone out. So they had all been threatened with their jobs. And I was expecting everything to be a mess. That, you know, some of the workers were like, oh, I can't lose my job, I'm not going to strike anymore. Other workers like on the fence, and it was just going to be total chaos. And I spoke with Rachel and I was like, so what's going on? She's like, yeah, no, we met after school today. Everyone's still going, like, we're all still going on strike.
That's great.
Completely unfazed. And like
we gained 2.
Yeah, and then, I found out later they gained 2 people after the threatening email went out. And it's so inspiring. It's the way forward that we need to be going. And yeah, I love the line from Ann Paradis around, can you imagine if 1,500 workers went out on strike?
That's the goal.
Like, yeah, it's like, don't threaten me with a good time. Yeah, but you know, just it just truly amazing what they were able to do, and they went out on strike, and not one single person lost their job,
which is incredible.
Which is absolutely incredible for a wildcat strike, and it was because,
an illegal strike.
Yeah, an illegal wildcat strike, and it's because they stood together.
Exactly.
Right. If it had been 5 people that had been gone out, cut them, terminated, hire new people. But it was because 26 people went out on strike, which is like 3/4 of that place, right? That Howard Center had to step back, and they could not terminate anyone because of the fact that they stood together, and just such an amazing example. And it's the way what we need to be doing moving forward.
Great. Last round of hands. Any final thoughts? Okay, so for the sake of our recording for Public Access TV, I do want to make sure I thank everybody by name and organization as you're wrapping up. So Rachel of the Howard Center, APSME 1674, do you mind speaking first? Any final thoughts? And then we'll pass it on to Rachel from Migrant Justice.
Be sure to grab the mic.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this was a really informative process as someone who's never organized before. I'm excited to continue doing this, and I'm really excited to learn from folks like you and work together with folks like you.
Awesome, thank you.
I don't know that I have any wise words, but for the record, Rachel from Migrant Justice. Yeah, I think just, you know, as I was saying earlier, continuing to move forward and accept that, like, it's a process, it takes a while, but we are strong and there's a lot of us. And I think there's a lot of reason to be angry and sad and hurt, and there's also a lot of reason to be excited and inspired and moved. So I think holding on to both and leaving room for both.
That's right. Yeah, so Janette from Minneapolis and from various organizations, so DSA, Tempest, and OPEIU, if you can give us your final thoughts.
Yeah, so start organizing your coworkers right now. Start organizing your neighbors. Believe in the potential in everyone around you, but also don't put people on a pedestal or put expectations that are not necessary, because like I said, people will inevitably disappoint you, but they will also inevitably surprise you, and keep building those relationships one-on-one and in groups, and talking and being honest and kind to people. Make sure you have a whistle. Download the Signal app if you don't have it. Start going to the upstander trainings in your area, and make sure that your business is a Fourth Amendment business.
Mm-hmm.
So Todd from the Maine DSA and candidate for the House, if you can give us your final thoughts.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think Minneapolis is incredibly inspiring, and inevitably Janette and others are on the front line, and it's an exhausting struggle. So all solidarity to you, and inevitably people are going to go up and down. I think, unfortunately, millions of more people are going to have to go through what Janette is going through, and before powerful enough. I continue to think Trump is very strong, partially because the mainstream Democrats are so weak in opposition. So I think he is going to continue this for the next 3 years. I think any notion that they half blinked in Minneapolis, maybe, and that has taken that level of struggle. They blinked around Doge. They gave it up. They just kept doing what they want. He's pretty good at this cycle of of chaos and trauma all the time. And building a real fascist administrative state, which is extremely powerful. So that's what we're up against. And a very large faction, if not the majority of the American ruling class, has been like, well, we didn't think this was going to work, but we'll ride the pony as long as he goes. So I think that's what we're up against. To say a little bit on the United Front, I think Janet's right, is that we have to, the famous mine worker leader in the 30s, John Lewis, said, who gets the bird, the hunter or the dog? So you have to know who the dog is, you have to know who the hunter is. But I think there's a lot of things in between. Our sheriff, who we've been fighting for 10 months on the question of jailing people in Cumberland County Jail, last week came out and denounced ICE because they abducted one of his jailers, like an immigrant was a jailer. The governor, who has vetoed all sorts of things, is fighting for her political life against Graham Plattner from a challenge from the left, and so she's talking about eviction moratoriums and how dare ICE come into our state. But there's so those are Democrats, but so is Graham Plattner. And he is fighting a hell of a fight, and there's some other people as well. And they're very different. They're putting their money where their mouth is, their bodies on the line. The clergy, the unions, who are all in general folks who vote Democrat and not even left Democrat, have moved in our direction, and we have to extend a hand and say thank you very much. And they don't always agree every step of the way, but when they move and they bring people with them, they can do things that we cannot do on our own. So I think those relationships are very important. Last thing I'll say, a funny anecdote. We were standing at a protest, it's some DSA comrades, one of them happens to be on the city council in Portland, and my former co-chair and I were standing there leading chants and such, and she got up on the mic and she said, "This is about people's power," and she was absolutely right. This is about we save us. This is about the unions, about the clergy, about the people, about the immigrants coming together. It's a people's movement, and the politicians have to get out of the way because none of the politicians have done a goddamn thing to help the movement. And then she literally handed the mic over to our politician, Wes. And it showed to me that we have to think through how do we move people, that we cannot say just because there's a D next to your name or you are a politician that you are automatically an enemy. Doesn't mean you're automatically a dyed-in-the-wool person who's going to go all the way. But some of those people will be. The clergy in New Hampshire who stood up and said, prepare your last rites and be ready to meet your maker, that person I want on my side. He may or may not be a socialist, but there are all sorts of people who are drawing those conclusions. So while we maintain our principles, I think and we get frustrated with people who do frustrating things. If we want the unions, if we want the clergy, if we want the big organizations, we have to learn how to act as a minority, even when we feel strong in our neighborhoods and strong in our unions, and we take important, powerful action. We're still a small minority of an active minority in an ocean of millions of people who have not yet decided to act. And so that shapes the whole United Front tactic. Anyway, thank you very much. This was an incredibly fascinating discussion. And I will just say, as a proud DSA member, we just cracked 100,000, so I'm pretty happy with that.
All right, thanks, Todd. So before Ashley sums us up, I do want to just briefly let people or remind people that this was put on by the Vermont Tempest Collective, and we very much want more people to get involved. We meet every other Monday night here in this space, so usually 6 to 7:30. I have a makeshift sign-up sheet here, so put your name, phone number, email down. Oh, there is an actual more official sign-up sheet on the table, so that one's even better. And we're going to go out and grab a bite to eat after this, so if you want to talk more, think about other ways to get involved, that's a really good place to do it.
Thanks to everybody on the panel and everybody here. And the most important thing is that this is a meeting of activists who are in the thick of this struggle. And we have to understand, I think Todd is absolutely right, this is a long-term struggle. And it's about Trump, but it's much, much bigger than Trump, because the problems predate him. They've gotten 1,000 times worse under him, and they are going to likely get worse unless we build a permanent kind of movement that can really change the balance of, frankly, class power in this country, so that the bosses that run this country and the politicians that are in their pay are afraid of us, and we can set the terms for wages, benefits, working conditions, the way our government is structured, the way our society works. So we have to build with that big vision in mind, and that gives you staying power through the ups and downs, which are inevitable in this moment. For the last decade, 15, 20 years, all it's been is up like a rocket, down like a rock as an experience, all the way back to the battle in Seattle that Todd was referencing, the great uprising against the World Trade Organization, gigantic movement in the run-up to the Iraq War, and then it all collapsed and disappeared. And then the Iraq War triggered another mass anti-war movement, and then that collapsed, and then we hit the Great Recession and people were demoralized. But then Occupy happened, Black Lives Matter happened, the Red State Teachers Revolt, the Me Too uprising, the Women's March under Trump. We've been through so many explosive struggles, and the key weakness throughout all of it is we have not built permanent organization to undergird the struggle for the long haul. So it meant that when we went up like a rocket, we did go down with like a rock and didn't preserve the networks of activists in political organization like Tempest, like DSA, like other socialist organizations who have a big vision of where we're headed. We didn't consolidate and expand movement organization for the long haul. That's why organizations like Migrant Justice are invaluable, because that's movement infrastructure for the long haul. We need that in the trade union movement, which right now is a spectator sport. Most people have no active relationship with their union. We need unions that are made of militants, like Gene Garvin is made up, who have transformed their workplace by daring to struggle and dare to win. Like that needs to be consolidated in permanent union organization. And we need to consolidate big united fronts of community, trade union, political organizations. And I think the most important developing one in this state is the Mayday Strong Coalition, which is affiliated to the national Mayday Strong Coalition, which is the group that's calling for strikes on May Day. That's bringing together trade unions, community organizations, NGOs, all sorts of advocacy groups on a national level. We're trying to do that at the same level here in Vermont. We're the people who organized May Day out at Williston last year, that organized the Labor Day March, that organized the People's Summit in the fall, and we're gearing up for exactly that stuff at a higher level of intensity. So we're all preparing strike schools to train up people like Gene Garvin so that next strike, whether wildcat, legal, or otherwise, there are more people who join it so that it can't be isolated, can't be punished, can't be disciplined because they're, again, afraid of us. So strike schools, and we're projecting a mass march on Williston on May Day against the two ICE facilities out there, which is our national obligation, because these are national and international agencies of ICE. So we've got that, plus Labor Day, plus another People Summit. I think what we need to do is build out that coalition so that we've got more permanent members of a formation that can really move people in mass numbers. Just a couple of other things. One, on demands. I think we have to have a conception of escalating demands, from immediate demands to end demands. The immediate demands right now is everything that Rachel laid out for migrant justice, demasking ICE, and especially having legal rights for all migrants detained. That bill is really important. We want that enacted immediately, and so we should pressure for that. We need campaigns to free anybody detained, like Stephen Tendo, and especially thinking about these 2 ICE facilities in Williston, we want ICE out of Vermont. Those facilities have to be shut down. We're already making progress in Williston, which is the town that oversees these two facilities. The select board has condemned those 2 facilities and is already on record that they don't support them in Williston. That's already a big movement in Williston. I would have never predicted that in Williston, Vermont. And you can get a sense of the sea change in public opinion that's welling up and influencing politicians who never dreamed about doing such a thing. And then we have to set as a long-term goal abolition of ICE. This is a Gestapo that cannot be reformed. It must be abolished, and the money should be spent on what people need: jobs and education, not war and deportation, which is the priorities of the Trump administration. And the final thing I'll say is that we have to raise the goal of a different kind of society in the middle of all this, because everybody, I think, agrees with Ken. Business as usual before Trump is part of the problem, not part of the solution. We need to raise our expectations of a society that puts people and the planet first and gets rid of corporate power and establishes a new socialist democracy. That's what we should be fighting for in the United States and around the world. And that will put an end to Gestapos like ICE and put an end to the kind of daily horrible suffering of low wages, poor working conditions, and no benefits that far too many working class immigrants suffer under, and far too many working class people in the United States and around the world suffer from. That's the project of Tempest. I encourage you to join, but join organization, join DSA, join trade unions, join a coalition. We need people in it for the long haul. This is the fight of our lives that we're in. It's a long fight. It's a marathon, not a sprint, but it is the fight of our lives.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks, Todd and Janette.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you guys.
Thank you, guys. Great meeting. Really appreciate it. Be in touch.
Solidarity. Keep organizing.
Give me your address, I can send you a sweatshirt.
I got it. I'll give it to Rachel.
Yeah. I'll send you an order. We'll send you some money too.
Thanks, Todd and Janette. Night, everybody.
Thank you, comrades. Have a good night.
Stay strong, Janette. We're with you.
Stay brave.
Stay brave.
Comrades.
Stay brave.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.